They said they bought the house for the backyard. A quiet cul-de-sac, kids on scooters, barbecues in summer. A fixer-upper they could handle. That was the plan. Paint the walls, refinish the floors, call it home. Then a wall came down. It was supposed to be a simple remodel. Open the kitchen, add light, create a line of sight to the yard. They pulled drywall, they cut insulation. They reached a space that should not exist. A hollow, a cavity, not a vent, not a chase, not on any plan. Sealed tight, nails from another decade, edges caulked and painted to disappear. Inside sat a wooden box, handmade, heavy for its size, dust thick enough to write a name. They carried it to the counter. They did not speak. They lifted the lid. A journal, brittle letters wrapped with twine, a tarnished silver locket. The initials on the locket read A.M. They opened the journal. The first page had a date, 1986. They don't know I'm writing this, it began. If anything happens to me, someone needs to know. The handwriting was neat at first, calm, careful loops. It belonged to a young woman named Annalise. She was not the owner. She was a tenant. She lived in this house, this room, these walls. She wrote about a new job, a new start. She wrote about saving up, about trust. Then the tone shifted. She wrote about cars parked outside at odd hours. The same sedan, the same dented fender, lights off, engine idling. She wrote about footsteps in the hallway when she knew she was alone, about keys that did not sit where she left them, about the feeling of being watched. She wrote about telling people, and about how they smiled and said she was stressed, sensitive, unwell. They say I'm imagining it, one entry read. Maybe I am, but I keep hearing the back door click. I lock it. I know I lock it. It is unlocked in the morning. She wrote about a landlord who brushed off complaints. Old houses settle, he said. Young women panic, he said. She wrote about a maintenance visit. A man in a uniform came to replace a filter. He stood too close. He looked too long. He asked questions that were not about air filters. She wrote about finding a small hole drilled into the wall behind a set of shelves. She wrote about covering it with tape. The tape would be pulled back the next day. The entries came closer together, shorter, tighter, ink pressed harder into the page. She outlined a plan. Stay with a friend for a few nights. Change the locks if the landlord allowed. Keep a bag packed near the door. Then the entries stopped. There was no closing line, no goodbye, just a half-finished sentence about calling her mother back. A date at the top, and then nothing. The family sat at the counter and turned pages with trembling fingers. They opened the letters next. Most were from Annalise to a friend across town. Some were drafts she never mailed. They spoke in the same voice, smart, hopeful, slipping into fear. The locket was tarnished. They pried it open with a butter knife. Inside was a tiny sliver of paper, folded 3 times, a phone number with no area code, and one word in pencil, please. They looked at each other. They did not want to be the kind of people who chase ghosts. But it was their house, her house. This was on them now. They tested the waters at the next block party. Casual voices, polite smiles. Hey, does anyone remember a tenant named Annalise? Lived here in the 80s? Blank stares, shrugs, nervous laughter. One neighbor said, "Oh, I think she moved," and drifted away mid-sentence. Another said, "That was a long time ago," and turned to refill a drink that was already full. The host smiled too wide. The music got louder. The couple looked at each other again. They felt a door shut without a sound. They went to the library. The building smelled like old paper and dust. They asked for city directories. They asked for archives. They asked for microfilm. Hours passed in the glow of a machine. There it was, a headline buried on page 6. Young woman leaves town unexpectedly, room left intact, no foul play suspected. The date was 2 days after her last journal entry. The sentence, "no foul play suspected," worked like a lid closing. So neat, so final. No questions invited. The husband went from curious to consumed. He started a map on the dining table. He pinned names and addresses. He drew lines. Who owned the house in 1986? The same landlord who retired down the street. Still alive, still present, still saying hello at the mailbox. The husband walked up to him with the journal in a backpack. "Do you remember a tenant named Annalise?" he asked. The landlord did not blink. "That was a long time ago," he said. "Best to let things lie." He smiled. He did not ask who Annalise was. He did not ask why the question came up. His eyes moved past the husband to the yard beyond. The husband walked back home with his heart pounding. He set the journal on the counter again. He reread a line that hooked into him. "They keep saying I'm unstable. But what if I'm right? What if I'm not the only one?" He started looking for patterns. The maintenance company in her entries had a name he recognized. It had serviced homes in the area for decades. Its vans still rolled through the cul-de-sac. It once belonged to the landlord. He checked service stickers in their utility closet. There it was. The same company had been here, over and over, years on years. He checked old receipts left in a drawer. The same signature repeated. Appointments that did not make sense. Filter, inspection, routine check, penciled in at odd hours. He called the number inside the locket for form's sake. It rang and rang. Then a recorded voice said the number was not in service. He posted in a local forum. He left out names. He asked if anyone remembered a tenant who left suddenly. Most replies were nothing. One message pinged back late at night. A woman said her aunt rented from the same landlord in the late 80s. She said the aunt complained of someone entering when she was at work. Nothing was taken. Things were just moved. A drawer left open. A shampoo bottle turned. The woman wrote, she thought she was losing it. She left in a hurry. Everyone said she was dramatic. The husband's hands shook when he read it. He called the woman. They talked for an hour. Her story lined up with Annalise's entries. Different house, same pattern. The couple installed cameras in their own home, even though it felt silly. They checked doors twice before bed. They started waking at sounds they could not place. One night they heard a car idle across the street with lights off. It sat for 9 minutes. They watched from a dark window and said nothing. At dawn, the husband climbed into the attic. He crawled across beams and insulation. He found an access panel above the hall. It opened from the top and from below. A person could move quietly between spaces if they knew the house. He found a drilled hole in the drywall above a closet. It lined up with the spot where Annalise said she taped over a hole. Someone had patched it, then painted it, then sealed a secret cavity where the box sat. He went cold. This was not imagination. This was not houses settle. He printed property records. He found that the landlord had owned a cluster of rentals within walking distance. He found that the maintenance company had exclusive contracts on them. He found that complaints filed back then went nowhere. Some were missing from the record entirely. He filed a public records request for police calls to this address in 1986. The file came back thin. 2 calls, a noise complaint, a welfare check, both closed with no issue. He stared at that line. No issue. It felt like the archive version of a hand over a mouth. He went back to the letters. One draft mentioned a friend's name and a planned meetup at a diner that no longer existed. He found a photo online of the old sign. He drove to the corner where it stood. A dentist office sat there now. He sat in the car and felt the weight of a conversation that never happened. He brought the journal to a historian at the library. She looked at the paper, the ink, the dates. She nodded. She said it was real. She said women like Annalise were often written off. She said the phrase, "no foul play," was a stamp used too fast. The couple invited the older neighbor over for tea. The neighbor had lived on the street since the 70s. She held the locket in her palm for a long time. She did not open it. She said only, "Some things were not safe to say back then." Her eyes stayed on the window. The husband went to the maintenance company office. It was different now. New owners, new logo, new reception desk. He asked about employee records from the 80s. They smiled politely. They said those were long gone. They said, "We can't help you." He stared at a framed photo on the wall. A company celebration from the late 80s. A banner for a safety award. Dozens of faces. In the back, a man half-turned. The same square jaw as the faint figure in the Polaroid they had not yet found. Back home, the wife lifted the locket again. She turned it in the light. She pressed along the hinge and felt a second seam. She worked a pin into it. It popped. Behind the thin metal was a hidden pocket. Inside, a small Polaroid curled with age. A flash-burned living room. Annalise in the foreground, eyes too wide, mouth almost open. Behind her, in the mirror, a reflection of a man in a maintenance uniform, half in frame, half out, a patch on his chest with the company name. The wife handed the photo to the husband without a word. They stood in the kitchen, perfectly still, listening to the refrigerator hum. Now the story snapped into place. The silence at the block party, the landlord's flat line, the missing records, the fast, no foul play. If a tenant left unexpectedly, a landlord could relist the unit. If a tenant was labeled unstable, someone could roll their eyes and move on. If someone said imagination, it kept the machine running. They were not looking at a disappearance. They were looking at an erasure. They scanned the photo. They brightened the mirror. They sharpened the patch. The company name showed clear. The logo from the old van. The same one still parked at the end of the block some mornings. A different driver. A different era. Same brand. The husband printed the image and slipped it into a sleeve. He walked to the landlord's house again. He knocked. The door opened a crack. "I found this in my wall," the husband said. He held up the photo, and this locket, and her journal. The landlord took a breath, took too long to answer. Then he said, "People leave. People move on. Sometimes they make drama where there is none." He tried to close the door. The husband kept his hand out of the way. "She wrote that she felt watched," the husband said. "She wrote that she told you. She wrote that you said she was unstable." The landlord's face did not change. "Let it lie," he said again. Then he shut the door. The couple did not sleep that night. They moved the journal to a fireproof box. They backed up photos to 2 places. They sent a copy to a friend not on the street. They checked the cameras. They saw a figure walk a line across their front yard around 2 in the morning. Not close, not lingering, just passing through in a straight path that cut the corner as if it were a habit. They took the Polaroid to a retired cop they knew from a different part of town. He looked at it. He looked at them. He said, "You didn't hear this from me, but there were whispers back then." He said, "Landlords kept things quiet. Maintenance had keys. Tenants had little power." He said, "Paper gets lost." The retired cop told them to be careful, to keep a record, to document everything. He said, "If you feel pushed, bring it public." They started to tell the story to anyone who would listen. Not in whispers, plain, clear. Names if needed, dates if needed. The backyard they loved now felt like a stage. A woman from 3 streets over came by with a story of her own. In 1987, she said, a friend rented from the same landlord. Her friend kept finding muddy footprints in the living room after rain. She thought she had bad memory. She thought she was sleepwalking. She broke her lease. She left town. End of story as far as the street was concerned. Another neighbor admitted that a rumor had floated around years ago. It was brushed off as gossip. It dissolved like a sugar cube in a cup of coffee. The couple laid the journal on the table and read aloud to each other. They read the opening line again. "They don't know I'm writing this." They read the line that haunted the husband. "What if I'm not the only one?" They were no longer asking if they should keep digging. They were asking how far they could go. The house held more than family photos and paint chips. It held a record someone had tried to bury. A space sealed with a steady hand. A locket pressed thin around a cry for help. The couple thought of the backyard and why they chose the house. They thought of their kids and the future they wanted. They thought of what it means to be the person who opens the box. They could have resealed the wall. They could have told themselves it was a sad story from another time. They did not. They contacted a reporter in town known for chasing quiet stories. They handed over copies of the journal, the letters, the Polaroid. They kept the originals safe. They filed a formal complaint with the state against the old landlord. They filed a request for any work orders under the maintenance company name in the 80s and 90s. They asked to see any file that mentioned Annalise. They braced for silence. They got silence. The reporter knocked on old doors. She found a former employee of the maintenance company. He remembered keys everywhere. He remembered being told to check things when tenants were at work. He remembered a supervisor who kept a ring of master keys on a belt like trophies. He did not want to go on record. He did not want to be dragged into a story this old. He did not want trouble. The reporter said a name. He went quiet. He said, "I have to go." The couple stood in their kitchen and stared at the drywall where the cavity had been. They ran their fingers over the new patch. They talked about whether to move. They talked about whether moving would fix anything. They looked out at the yard they loved. They heard kids yelling at each other in the distance about a game. They watched a dog race along the fence. They felt the weight of a secret the house could not carry alone anymore. Here is what sits on the record now. A journal from 1986. A string of entries that narrow into fear. A landlord who says, "Let things lie." A maintenance company that spanned decades. An old photo with a man in a uniform reflected where he should not be. A phrase stamped on a tiny article. No foul play suspected. A street that looked away. A young woman who did not leave a forwarding address because there was nothing to forward. Here is the part that matters. The silence makes sense if you see the whole machine. The denial makes sense if you see who holds the keys. The absence of records makes sense if you see who writes history. Annalise did not just disappear. She was erased. But the house remembered. It kept her words behind a wall. It kept a locket thin as a secret. It kept a photo that caught a sliver of truth. It kept a box like a throat that never cleared. Until the day the wall came down. Until the day someone looked. Until the day someone asked the wrong question at the right time and noticed every flinch. If stories like this keep you up at night, subscribe to the Hidden Files for more real, strange, and unsolved tales. Like, share, and comment if you've ever stumbled on a mystery in your own backyard. Tell us what you would have done. Tell us what you think happened to Annalise. Tell us what you see in that mirror behind her. You never know what's hiding behind the walls.